Hello! We finally made it through the Phoenix summer, and it's now time to do some post-summer, pre-fall chores in the rose garden. So I actually meant to do this video and the chores associated with this video probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, kind of around the end of September, right when it started cooling down. However, I had maybe some things going on, and then the weekend I had dedicated to do this video and these chores, it ended up raining, which is kind of bizarre to have rain in the Phoenix area this time of year, but it did end up raining, so I have not been able to do a majority of the fall chores until right now. So one of the big chores that I like to do for after summer and when it starts to cool down is I do like to do a little prune on all of my roses. I do have 1 or 2 videos I did last year showing how I like to do this prune. However, this year I only got to do 1 rose in this window that I usually like to prune for the fall. So since I have the one that I did prune when I like to, and I've done most of the remaining roses here at the beginning of October, I thought it would be a good time to show you kind of the difference between the two, what happens when you prune kind of end of summer, mid to end September, versus kind of putting it off or not doing any pruning at all. So of course this chore is not necessary to do for your roses, but I do think that it makes the rose kind of put on really nice growth for the fall bloom season. So I'm going to show you kind of the difference. I have the one that I pruned, one that I haven't pruned, and then I also pruned some a little later than usual, so I'll show you how those look as well in case you haven't pruned yet. Again, just to show you the difference and how the rose performs and whether or not you would like to do it for your own roses. I can also show you just kind of what else I've been doing in the rose garden now that the weather has cooled down. So I will show you that. Okay, so I have mentioned before that in the summer I tend to not like to do so many chores or maintenance around the yard. I usually just leave it be since it is so hot here. I like to just let the roses kind of fend for themselves over the summer. And then once it starts to cool down a little bit, I'll start to do some cleanup. So you can see where I have started to prune and kind of rake away a lot of the buildup that was around them when the monsoons came in. So I've started to make some good progress on cleaning up this side yard. But for now, I do want to go through and show you how I've cleaned up some of these rose bushes for the fall. Okay, so here I have one of my rose bushes that I haven't done anything at all to this rose bush since the summer or after the summer. It's just left as is. It doesn't look terrible, but it does not look great. You can see no deadheading. A lot of this foliage is lacking kind of nutrients. When it does warm up here, it does make it harder for the rose to get the proper nutrients, so its foliage does start to not look the best. You can see it has started to bloom. The bloom looks fairly nice, still a little small because it has still been a bit warm out, and then this foliage isn't great. Not to mention it is pretty kind of top heavy, kind of like there's kind of a lot of junk on the top. New growth is kind of coming out of the top, and so that is how a lot of the roses here end up looking after the summer, especially if you don't do anything to it. So this little rose bush over here is a hybrid tea. This one I did actually prune in the mid to end September time, and you can see this does look a lot different. I did prune it back so it's not got the junky foliage from the summer, and then too you can see there's a lot more new foliage coming up because this foliage is coming up when it cooled down more, it's not going to look as bad as kind of some of the stuff that put on during warmer weather. It did encourage the growth, so there's not so much bulky growth at the top. So I think it gave a lot of the new growth a better, more room to grow, and so it's growing kind of more hardy and not just kind of small spindly growth at the top. There's not a lot of, junk and clusters on this. So I think when this does bloom, even though we cut it back and it maybe prevented it from blooming as soon as the other rose bloomed, I think when this does bloom, it's going to look a lot nicer. Okay, so here is my Oklahoma rose. This is a hybrid tea. So you can see, so this one I just pruned back just yesterday. So I did not get to prune this rose like I usually prune in September, and you can see it's not terrible. I went in and I cleaned, I did end up cleaning it up. I did do a pruning, and I left the growth that had blooms on it, so that it's gonna bloom. The growth, I think, looks fairly nice. The blooms are looking nice. I think they're starting with the cool down in weather. I think the foliage is probably going to start to green up a little bit more, but you can see it looks a little bit more, maybe not as good as the previous, but because I didn't do a pruning on it right away, you can see it put on growth right away and it started blooming earlier. So if you think that this looks okay and you like the idea of the roses blooming earlier, you may just want to wait and kind of clean it up after it's kind of put on some buds. That is an option. I personally do prefer doing like a bit of a cleanup in September, just to give it a better look when it does grow in, although I'm not unhappy with roses blooming. And you can see I do have some other roses blooming back there, and I've done more or less the same thing where I've left the new growth on with the buds and just kind of cleaned it up, and they don't look terrible. But ultimately, if you do kind of want to shape up the rose a little better, give the rose an opportunity to put on foliage when the weather does cool down, so it's much greener. I do think pruning it in September is a nice idea. This one here is called Doris Day. It's a little floribunda rose. I think this rose does very, very well here in the summer here in Phoenix. It bloomed almost all summer. You can see a lot of the foliage looks a lot better than the couple others that we looked at. I think just overall this one takes the heat a bit more. So this one didn't need too much of the post-summer pruning anyway. I kind of just took out some of the old growth on this one and let this one bloom. So it may depend on the rose, whether or not you want to do when you want to do the pruning. So here I have two of my ground cover roses. The one that's blooming, the coral one, is the coral drift rose, and this one's a flower carpet. So the little drift roses I think do very well here. You can see it has a lot of clustered blooms even though it's coming right out of summer. It had quite a bit of blooms even in the summer, but yes, even this one I did kind of, I cut back and thinned up and got some of the growth off. Same with its buddy over here, this flower carpet rose. So here you can see this is another hybrid tea I have. It again started to put on growth, and I just went in and cleaned up as best I could and left the blooms on. Again, I think it doesn't maybe look as good as it's going to look if we had pruned it a bit earlier, but it's not terrible. This rose back here is my ketchup and mustard floribunda. This is obviously a little tree rose. So this one, after the monsoon winds came through, I ended up having to take out some of the growth on this side. So I didn't do kind of like the fall pruning on it so much as I had to take growth off of this side because it was leaning this way a bit too much. So this one I did prune right after some monsoon winds. Because it was still pretty hot out when I pruned it, I didn't clean it up as much as I normally would. I kind of just took some growth out to try and even up the rows so that it wouldn't fall over after the monsoon winds. It is putting on some new growth and it doesn't look terrible. Should be blooming here. It's got some new growth with buds. Okay, and then here this guy is a little vine. You can see it's totally out of control. I have not pruned any of my vines yet. So for my vines, this year I'm going to do kind of like the hard cut back shaping and pruning for the vines. Now, this time of year, I think the vines do tend to put on like longer growth and they tend to take a bit longer to bloom. So I am going to do these vines, train and shape them and prune them back, hard cut back now, so that in the spring, winter, spring, they will start putting on new blooms. But the rest of the yard, I'm just going to prune and deadhead as needed throughout the fall. I am going to start mulching and fertilizing again as needed. And I won't do my hard cut back on my shrub type roses until the winter. You can see my other vine back there that is in need of some training and pruning that I will take care of along with that one. And I will most likely show how I prune this topiary rose, this little tree rose, on camera. I have not pruned this one yet at all. This is just how it looked. This is how it's looking with nothing after the summer. So I'll probably film pruning this one as well. So like I said, be on the lookout for a vine pruning and training video as well as a tree rose pruning video from me shortly. And if you like this video or have any comments or questions, please do leave me a comment below. Thank you.